Right, so the number of independent MPs has now grown by 7, thanks to Keir Starmer's immoral suspension of his own MPs, who chose to put lifting child poverty above his whims and the coercion of the party whips, making it unlucky for some, hopefully, Starmer, 13 independent MPs currently sitting in Parliament. 5 of those 6 originally elected independent MPs have, as we've already witnessed, formed a loose alliance, I suppose is the best way to look at it, on several issues. Most notably the issue of Israel and Gaza, though, resulting in this group being collectively referred to as the Gaza Bloc. But now, as 7 of Labour's most progressive MPs join them as independents, a letter to them signed by the 5 Gaza Bloc MPs has got people postulating that this group could be about to grow, and if so, potentially form what would be the 4th largest group in Parliament if they come together in a more formal way. So is this likely, and are we starting to see the first steps towards that? Right, so Keir Starmer, as we know, has suspended 7 of his MPs for opposing his plans to keep kids in poverty because fundamentally he lacks the political will to lift them out of it. The money's always there, it's a choice to not spend it, because if we went to war tomorrow, we know the money would be there for that, don't we? And the deal, allegedly, is that their suspensions would be reviewed after 6 months, and to my mind that means depending on how they vote in accordance with Starmer's amoral wishes on whatever policies and issues come up for a vote in the coming months, will depend if they get the whip back at the end of that time or any time soon after that. Starmer has gone hard and heavy with his use of the party whip. He's already behaving like a despot over 7 votes that went against him, when he had 411 Labour MPs of his own, when overwhelmingly he won the vote as everybody pretty much knew he was going to. If he's going to carry on like that, carry on mounting whipping operations on anything remotely contentious, then Parliament actually has a duty to step in. There are actually safeguards against the Prime Minister behaving like this, yet it will remain to be seen if the powers Parliament has to intervene get used as they can be. The party whip is not something that can be used all of the time, otherwise why would we bother with Parliament or having MPs at all? And this is a point made very well in a thread by Ben Sellers, a chap who used to work for former Labour MP Laura Pidcock. He's a clever sort, rather insightful. The most relevant parts of his thread read, "I get that people are not confronted with the details of parliamentary democracy in their daily lives. We used to have Tony Benn to remind us, but he's sadly gone. And the temptation is to see a government and party as a company, but it isn't. And there are good reasons why. MPs have a number of factors to consider for each vote, including their party loyalty, the views and interests of their constituents, and their own conscience. Starmer is trying to reduce that to loyalty towards the party leadership, and a highly factional one at that. Dangerous stuff. The whip is normally used to enforce discipline on front bench MPs, cabinet members, and so on. It can still be brutal, but the idea is that those frontline MPs have chosen to be part of a collective responsibility as shadow or government representatives. To use it against backbenchers, especially over a single vote on an amendment, is pretty draconian behaviour. Conventionally, backbenchers are seen as having more freedom and act as the conscience of the party, precisely because they can vote against the leadership. This isn't, as the man-boys of Starmer's Praetorian Guard would have it, gesture politics, but an important part of our parliamentary democracy. If we think back to the Iraq war debates, did the 199 MPs who voted against Blair lose the whip? Of course not. Starmer, as has been his style, has ripped up another democratic principle for the sake of a factional victory and the erasure of the left from the PLP. It's spiteful, vindictive and unjustifiable for anyone who respects democracy. Ben would be out, that's for sure. It's a bloody brilliant point, excellently raised. And it does lend itself to the belief that even if these MPs were handed the Labour whip back again, nothing would fundamentally change in the party they'd once again be part of. The same coercion, the same immorality would certainly face them again and again. And they'd be faced with a choice between doing what is right and just and fair, and again doing just what Starmer wants, which will almost certainly be the opposite of that. And the suspensions would almost certainly follow again, would they not? And so the potential, I suppose, for these MPs to perhaps wake up to that reality, to how things are going to be now Starmer is in government and wants to get his own way all the time, how this may well be played out all the time, despite him having that massive majority, despite him having room to weather minor dissent in his own ranks, as this was on the 2-child benefit cap SNP amendment. If his fragile ego can't handle even the smallest of rebellions over truly contentious issues such as this was, then is there any future for these suspended individuals in the Labour Party again? Was this just an excuse for Starmer to enact further purges of the left from Labour, so Labour becomes even more another version of the Tory party, knowing there were certain members of his party who would not be able to stomach voting for this? In which case, is another future possible for them now? Well, a letter to those 7 newly suspended Labour MPs from the Gaza Bloc, the loose grouping of the 5 independent MPs, Jeremy Corbyn, Shaukat Adam, Mohammed Iqbal, Ayub Khan and Adnan Hussain, to these 7, might offer them one. It read, "Dear colleagues, we thank you for standing up for your principles and voting to lift the 2-child benefit cap. As we all know, lifting the cap would alleviate poverty for 1 million children, bringing 300,000 out of it entirely and another 700,000 out of deep poverty. 93% of impacted parents say the policy makes them less able to afford food. It is a matter of great shame that a Labour government, supposedly on the side of working class people, voted to block the scrapping of this inhumane, unfair cap last night. It is beyond disgraceful that you have been punished for voting to alleviate child poverty. The decision puts party before country and displays a shameful absence of moral leadership. As independent members of Parliament, we welcome more members of Parliament who are free to speak out against inequality and injustice without fear of repercussion from their party whip. We look forward to working closely with you as you represent your constituents more effectively than ever as independent members of Parliament. As the 2 major parties fail to defend the bold changes this country desperately needs, we will be there to offer a real alternative and to defend a society that cares for each other and cares for all." Sounds almost like a little bit of a sales pitch, doesn't it? It's certainly a rolling out of the welcome mat to a group of MPs who were loyal to the Labour Party when Corbyn was leader, who voted for the right reasons. I don't think anybody can condemn any MP who voted to bring children out of poverty. If you are condemning them for that, you've got serious issues. And if you're condemning them for not showing loyalty to Labour instead, which you consider more important, what exactly about this warranted such loyalty anyway? It was a sick thing to do to impose a 3-line whip on child poverty on an issue so contentious and which Starmer was already certain to win. This vote was so much more an immoral opportunity for Starmer to rid himself of lefty MPs. So where was his loyalty to voters who elected these 7 now independent MPs as Labour MPs? Where is his respect there for that and their wishes, their choices? Coming back to the letter, though, it has got commentators postulating about the potential for a much larger independent bloc of MPs, who are, after all freshly elected, safe in their seats for the next 5 years, where they are now much more free to vote as they desire, no whip for them unless they really want to get back into Labour after how they've just been treated and how it is now being led. That, of course, remains to be seen, how they choose to vote going forwards. But what if they did form a new grouping, a kind of opposite version, an inverse version to Change UK, which split from Labour before, where instead of being an entity that just opposed Corbyn and opposed his anti-establishment politics and desire for change for the benefit of most of the people in this country, they form a group, not necessarily a party, but a group opposing Starmer in the same way. Now, unlike Change UK, this group would already consist of 5 MPs who have already proven they can win an election. All the Change UK members lost their seats. And given they support what is right and just and fair, are far more in tune with the needs of their constituents and that of the country. How official a group must be to count as an individual entity, though, I don't know. Certainly at local council level, independent groups are commonplace, but we don't see that in Parliament as a rule. This general election, thanks to social media, thanks to community organising, thanks to crowdfunding, such campaigns have bucked the trend and been successful in a number of cases. Yet still I'm unsure whether they would be entitled to short money to run their offices as a group, or whether they only get treated as individuals in that respect. Whether they would whether that would change with a more formal arrangement, and if so, would that have to be a new party? In fact, another facet to that line of thinking is the news recently that Starmer was looking to eradicate independent MPs and candidates going forwards, to freeze the people out of people-powered politics, forcing party politics upon us all by law, on the grounds of all the nonsense abuse stories disgruntled Labour losers, former MPs like Jonathan Ashworth comes out with, who seems to be on TV more now he isn't an MP than he ever was when he was one. Again, Starmer's immorality and control freakery coming out if such an anti-democratic move were to be made. But shoring up and firming up their position in Parliament, those independent MPs could protect themselves from that with a a more solid arrangement. It would tickle me no end. And I've no doubt plenty of other people have had this thought as well, that Starmer's authoritarianism, as shown here, which ended up creating a Corbyn-led, in part at least, party, if this is where things go, that so many people have for years been calling for since he was suspended by Starmer, since Corbyn set up the Peace and Justice Project and hoped that would turn into a party, hoped that he actually would. The irony, if this all becomes a political party at the end of the day, would be hilarious that it would be Starmer that actually instigated it. And actually, as we saw with the Collective, that movement during the general election campaign, backing a number of left-wing socialist candidates, endorsing parliamentary candidates going forwards for another election as well, such an arrangement as such could be, this grouping, could organise and group together candidates outside of Parliament currently who would be eliminated under such legislation if Starmer brings it in, but would then be able to continue their campaigns, as they certainly are still at the moment, to seek election in 2029, especially with so many Labour seats now so vulnerable with such small majorities. And if they get their act together sooner rather than later, they can set about enthusing and inspiring voters who in record-breaking numbers didn't bother to vote this time around. With potentially 7 new members of this independent group now, possibly, independent MPs would end up forming the 4th largest parliamentary group, behind Labour, the Tories and the Lib Dems. I also wouldn't rule out some form of an alliance with the 4 Green MPs necessarily here either, though on a more informal arrangement. Obviously they're already in a party of their own, in what would be known as a technical group. Now some might sneer at this whole concept, this just spitballing, not just because it is largely spitballing and conjecture at this point. On one hand, because already there have been interviews with MPs such as Zara Sultana who have said she hopes to have the Labour whip restored. But you lost it because you voted in the interest of your constituents. And unless you're going to stop doing that in effect, the whip isn't coming back. And if it does, it may not come back for long as the next contentious vote comes up. So this is perhaps a road that some of these MPs must travel to realise there may be no way back for them to the Labour Party they thought they were once part of. But also some are jeering because such a group would be, in their mind, irrelevantly small. Someone criticising this, I noticed on social media, referred to it as such, irrelevantly small. You're missing the point, though. Here will be a group of MPs who would, in effect, symbolise the loss of moral compass of Starmer's Labour. Starmer's Labour not only spurned, but actively punished MPs who showed their morality in their party for daring to show that. They will be an ongoing source of actively holding Labour accountable and a reminder that Starmer's Labour is completely immoral and accountable for what it says and what it does going forwards, and hold them to account every single day of that. And frankly, when it comes to voting, Starmer's Labour is such a huge majority that for the next 5 years there will be little that any party can do to stop them from doing whatever they like. But having some MPs calling them out for it, standing for what's right, pointing that out, along with independent media like this channel, plenty of others though, amplifying those messages, as this channel certainly will, well, Starmer can enjoy his next 5 years all he likes, but if he doesn't show some intent to try and make people's lives better, show some semblance of a moral fibre, which he certainly hasn't here, over this next 5 years, over that time, it's going to be exposed bit by bit every single day. I sincerely hope these 7 newly independent MPs realise they actually have more power outside of Starmer's perversely huge majority than they had within it. Meanwhile, on the subject of booting out and banning independent MPs and candidates, if you hadn't heard about these plans, I can't say I'm particularly surprised. The mainstream media have not covered it well. Do check out this video recommendation here for more details on that story. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.